I was this last week for a couple days in Lincoln, Nebraska, celebrating my sister graduated from nursing college and nursing school and is going to be an RN here after she takes the test here in a couple weeks. So we were out there celebrating her a little bit for a couple days. I rode out with my grandparents and rode back, and we were driving on Highway 2 in Nebraska, northern part of Nebraska. It's a small kind of two-lane road through farming and ranching country. A beautiful drive, but I can tell you what, we got about, halfway through this trip, and you know what happened? There was a guy standing in the middle of the road, and he had a sign that said, "Stop." Can you believe this? We had to stop in the road and stop moving for 5 minutes. It was the worst. And then, to make matters worse, when he did let us go, we could only drive 45 miles an hour. Can you believe this injustice? In the middle of Nebraska. Man, obviously this is not injustice. You cannot expect to drive through Nebraska or, frankly, Wyoming without hitting road construction for most of your trip, I would say, during any time there's not snow on the ground. But we do this, don't we? I think a lot of times we like to exaggerate things that happen in our lives to make them a bigger deal than they actually are, don't we? My kids are amazing at this. Like, if they're knocking anything out of the park, it's this. My daughter has convinced herself that though she gets toys out all day long, it is not her job to put them away. And it is just a huge travesty and injustice when we actually make her put toys away. We do this a lot of times in our lives, but in the grand scope of things, the things that we make bigger, like road construction or putting toys away, this is really nothing at all, is it? We make these things bigger. I feel like there's three things that I like to try and accomplish, when I speak. One of three things we need to try to make happen. First thing is I feel like we need to be in a place to where God can convict us personally. And this should happen on somewhat of a regular basis. A lot of times I also I feel like the Bible gets us to look outside of ourselves. And so we want to look outside of our personal desires, our personal wants, and we look outside to our church and our community in ways that we can affect and influence people around us for Christ. But I think it's important for us every once in a while to look even beyond that, to at times look to kind of the world around us and look for ways that we can influence people that we will probably never see in our lives, but need to be influenced for Christ. And so this morning, and we've done this a few times, right? When we have Andy Kohler or Brett Miller come up and talk, we are influencing people in Africa and Ireland that we're never going to see in our lives, but we're influencing them because of our involvement with them. This morning, I want to talk about a worldwide issue of injustice and slavery. And this is going to be a unique and special thing. This won't happen again probably. But I feel very convicted and feel like this is a very important topic because as Americans, I think we miss this. I think we don't realize how big of an issue injustice and slavery is in the world. And so I want to talk about this a little bit this morning. When the Bible talks about injustice, it's really talking about a specific kind of sin. And I really do believe this is sin. Injustice is the abuse of power to take from others who don't have. Injustice is taking from somebody the good that God has intended them. So their freedom, their life, their dignity, the product of their work, the love that they have for others. This is the rich and the powerful and the strong taking from those who have not. And we get a picture of injustice when we look at Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Read this with me, will you? Ecclesiastes chapter 4, it says this, "Again, I observed all the acts of oppression being done under the sun. Look at the tears of those who are oppressed. They have no one to comfort them. Power is with those who oppress them. They have no one to comfort them." This is a biblical picture of injustice from thousands of years ago. Someone who has power oppressing somebody who doesn't have power. Somebody who has taking from somebody who has little or who has really none. And we see this in the life of King David in the Old Testament, right? And probably one of his not so, it's certainly a popular time in his life, but not so good parts of his life. King David is on the roof when his army is out fighting, and he should really be with them, right? But he's at home, and he's on the roof at night, and he's looking out across the kingdom, and he sees over a couple houses down a woman taking a bath on the roof, and he wants her for his own. And so he abuses his power, and he goes and he sends for her to be brought to him. And he is with her. Sometime later, she discovers she's pregnant. And so rather than owning the situation, King David abuses his power some more in order to try and cover up this situation, right? He sends for her husband to come back from war, where he should have been, and in order to try to get them to be together in order to cover this up. But he would have none of it. The husband would have none of it. He sleeps outside of the house because none of the rest of the soldiers are able to come home and be with their wives either. And so that didn't work, and so David, frantically trying to cover up this situation, abuses his power some more, sends him back to war, and he's carrying a note to the commanding officer saying, put him on the front lines so that he may be killed. He abuses his power throughout this entire story. And David's friend Nathan, in the following chapter, comes to confront David on what he did. Ultimately, it's his abuse of power. You know, we would like to say that this is from thousands of years ago. This issue of injustice and slavery is from thousands of years ago. It's a struggle that doesn't happen anymore. But this is something that's in the history books. We can say that the world is different now. It's less brutal. It is more civil. It is more fair. But we need to understand that that's not the case. We need to understand that though we may not see it readily right in front of us, the world is full of injustice today. It is a very real thing. So this morning, we are joining with thousands of other churches around the globe, bringing awareness to this issue of injustice and slavery. And we're partnering with an organization called International Justice Mission. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But here's some statistics that I want to share with you. The Walk Free Foundation did some research, and they found that there is over 45 million. We'll get to that in a minute. The Walk Free Foundation found that there are over, I don't want us to miss this, 45 million people in the world today who live as slaves. 45 million people. Let's put that in perspective. 45 million people is greater than the population of 158 countries in the world. 45 million people is more slaves than the number of slaves trafficked 400 years ago in the transatlantic slave trade agreement. That number was around 12.5 million, which is still a horrifying amount of people being traded. But it's a fraction to what is happening today. 45 million slaves today is more than any other time in history. There are approximately 3 million people in the United States today. 45 million slaves is 1 out of every 6 people in the United States. 1 out of every 6 people in the United States. The annual profit of slavery is estimated to be around $32 billion. This is a very real thing in our world. It's not done with, it's not gone, it's not in the history books. It is happening right now in our world. 45 million people being enslaved today. And in order for us to understand this, I think we have to put ourselves as best we can into the shoes of the people who are living it. And so I want to show you Kumar. who is a boy who has lived this out in his life. Let's watch this.
You're working 14, 18-hour days with very little sleep, no freedom. Dignity is taken away from them, and that's something nobody should have to endure. We had a number of years ago, 2 of the bonded laborers escaped from a facility. And they were tracked down by the owners of the facility and brought back. And as a punishment for what they had done, their hands were chopped off.
We would go to the government officers and we'd say, sir, there is a bonded labor case. And almost always the response was, there is no bonded labor in my area. What are you talking?
How much? 30? Yeah, I'm afraid.
Rujira, there's a girl who's very afraid. Almost unable to walk.
This is Kumar. He was abandoned by his mother, and his father was suddenly killed. Orphaned and alone, he was accountable for his parents' debts. And at just 7 years old, he was forced into slavery. Kumar remembers a day where he was so ill he couldn't get out of bed. Immediately, his owner came looking for him. Kumar was trapped by debt and a slave owner who beat him continuously. He, like so many, had no remaining hope for a way out.
Think about that, if you can. 7 years old, a boy. It's a year older than my daughter. My daughter will turn 7 in a few months. 7 years old and alone. The only family you know has sold you off to a man who is harsh, who yells at you, who beats you, who forces you to wake up before the sun comes up and to work alongside adults doing adult labor, molding, hauling, and stacking clay bricks. You're a child. You don't understand this concept of slavery, but you are one. You're confused, you're terrified, there's no one to take care of you, there's no one to hold you, there's no one to look after you, there's no mother or father to love you. This is the reality for millions of people. Millions of children and families across India and the developing world today. This is their story. Forced labor leaves children like Kumar, leaves their hands scarred and raw. They only want to be a child. They want to go to school, they want to learn, they want to play and make friends, they want to feel loved, they want to be a child. But these kids can't think about things like this. There is only the work day in and day out. Kumar is not the only story. The reality is that slavery is pervasive across India. Enslaved women being gang raped by men. Brutal violence being used to create fear and prevent escape. One victim's arm was doused with kerosene and lit on fire for escaping. A mother's stomach was stomped when she tried to protect her 2-year-old daughter. Entire villages are often promised a job a distance away. They load them up in a truck and take them there, only for the people to realize they're never going home. There is no job, there's just slavery. They're beaten, they're shocked with electrical wires, they're tied up in sheds, they're treated as less than human. Kumar is one of what is estimated to be around 12 million slaves in India alone. This is 1/3 of the world's slaves in India. 12 million people. made in the image of God, reduced to less than human. So what do we do with this? How do we respond to this? How do we reconcile this? We have to start with what God says about this. And so in Luke chapter 4, Jesus talks about this. He talks about this issue of oppression and slavery. Jesus is, in chapter 4 of Luke, beginning his public ministry. He's kind of stating who he is and establishing who he is and what the kingdom of God is about. And will you read this with me, starting in verse 14, Luke chapter 4. It says this, "When Jesus returned to Galilee in the power of the Spirit, and news about him spread throughout the entire vicinity, he was teaching in the synagogues, being acclaimed by everyone. He came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. As usual, he entered the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. The scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him, and unrolling the scroll, he found the place where it was written, 'The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to free the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor.' He then rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. And the eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fixed on him." In the synagogue, Jesus establishes who he is by standing up and reading from the scroll of Isaiah. And this is foretelling of the Messiah coming, is what Jesus is reading here. And it just so happens that the Messiah coming is the one standing up and reading it to these people. Bringing good news to the poor, proclaiming the release of captives, bringing sight to the blind, freeing the oppressed. This is what Jesus is reading about. And on one side, this is talking about salvation that comes ultimately through him. The good news of salvation, bringing freedom from shame and addiction and anger, bringing us freedom from being slaves to sin. And this is right and this is good. But there's another side to this as well. Jesus also comes to free those who are in a very real physical slavery. This proclamation Jesus was making extends to people like Kumar, being imprisoned by other people. And this is the purpose behind organizations like International Justice Mission, IJM. For almost 20 years, this organization was created to embody this very call of Jesus for people like Kumar. And it's because of IJM's desire to show Christ's love to others that Kumar and so many others have been set free from their very real slavery. Let's watch the second half of this video.
IJM discovered the horrific conditions in the brick factory where Kumar and others were being forced to work against their will. And, based on their undercover video evidence, local government authorities and police came alongside IJM to conduct a rescue operation.
The more and more we are doing these rescues, people are getting aware that people are being abused. There is bonded labor, there is trafficking. Also, the law is going to take its course as well as perpetrators go behind.
When the team arrived in the morning and entered the brick factory, 15 men, women, and children were rescued and given their freedom back. Then, they were each given a certificate to prove that they no longer owe any debts to their former owner. And one was for Kumar. After being rescued, IJM placed Kumar in their aftercare program to heal.
You'd ask him a question anytime, no matter what, and he would say, the one thing I want to do, sir, is I want to study. He was clear about that.
And then, they enrolled him in school for the first time. Today, he is studying to be a social worker, to help those still suffering like he did.
இதை காட்டியிருந்தோன்னா அவர் உண்மையாகவே சந்தோஷப்பட்டிருப்பார். நம்ப அவர் அன்பாக இருந்தும் நான் இந்த அளவுக்கு இதை காட்டியிருந்தேன்னா.
And what we do at IJM is we go look for that lost sheep, that girl that's being abused, that widow who's been run out of her home. And we will search for her until we find her. That's how our Father has loved us. That's how we are called to love others. Not to search for them until we've satisfied ourselves. Not to search for them until it gets really hard. But to go after them until we find them. To be relentless in our love.
What happened in Kumar's life represents months of careful planning and investigating. Before IJM can actually go in and just start freeing people, there's their coordination with the local police so that they can infiltrate, document evidence, and then bring slaves like Kumar to freedom. And victims are then placed with a counselor who stays by their side, ensuring and reassuring them that they are now safe and free. After Kumar's release, he said this. This is a quote from him. He said, "When I heard that somebody is going to release me from here, I felt very happy. I was happy I no longer needed to suffer and that my life was about to change." And for Kumar, his life did change. This totally changed everything for him. He is thriving in his freedom now. He is a deep thinker. He's a college student. He has joined IJM's team to fight to bring freedom to slaves just like he was. And probably most importantly for Kumar, because of his interactions with the IJM team, he came to a faith and belief in Jesus Christ. And so this needs to be celebrated because people are following in Jesus' footsteps of bringing freedom to those who are in a very real slavery. The scope, though, of this work is still growing. This is one story, and we could talk about other stories, but the scope is still growing, and work still needs done daily. IJM consists of over 750 Christian individuals. It is a faith-based organization full of Christian individuals who are lawyers, criminal investigators, trauma social workers, pastors, graphic designers, janitors, anything that you can think of. And they work in 17 communities throughout Africa, Latin America, and South and Southeast Asia. Real freedom is happening not just for individuals like Kumar, but also for entire cities and countries. We can talk about the city of Cebu in the Philippines. IJM has been combating the sex trafficking of minors. And 5 years working with the local justice system, an independent auditor went in, independent from IJM, went in and confirmed a 79% reduction of the number of minors in the sex industry there in Cebu. This strategy has then been moved on to other major cities in the surrounding area. And it is a realistic goal to see and to have the complete eradication of the sex trafficking of minors in the Philippines within the next 10 to 20 years. Complete eradication. We can talk about Cambodia, which has been known as ground zero for pedophiles and for sex tourists. Working 15 years in Cambodia with the Cambodian leaders, police, courts, social services, IJM, they estimated that there was about 15 to 30% of minors involved in the sex market in some way. This is the largest commercial market in that country, and it has been nearly completely eradicated. This city has changed because of what has been done there. What was 15 to 30% involvement is now less than 1/10 of 1% being involved in the sex market there. There's still more work that needs to be done in these cities, but this needs to be celebrated. And so this morning, I want to challenge us in a couple ways. As we're listening to these stories, as we're hearing about the work that's being done, I want to challenge us really in two ways. I want us, first of all, to not turn a blind eye to what's going on in the world around us. This is not something that was taken care of in history. In fact, it is very real not only in other countries, it is very real in our country as well. The FBI in 2016 had reports of over 3,000 sex trafficking cases just here in the United States. It's estimated that around 293,000 children and teenagers are at risk of being trafficked. And here in Cheyenne, arrests for trafficking have taken place in the last several years at Cheyenne Frontier Days. And just down the interstate towards Denver, there's a major hub for sex trafficking and trading. This is a very real thing for us, not just globally, but in our city, in our state, and in our country. So in part, I want us as Christians to become aware of this issue. Be aware of what's happening in our back door, in our backyard. Secondly, I want to challenge us to partner with organizations to combat this. And I'm not talking about partnering as a church or having a committee or a ministry partner on behalf of the church. I'm talking about us personally praying about our involvement with partnering with organizations who are out doing the work. And this can happen in a couple different ways. One, we can partner in consistent and constant prayer for what's taking place all over the world. And secondly, if the Lord leads you to, financially partnering with organizations like IJM or like Rafa House is another organization that does similar work all over the country to combat slavery around the world. There's information in the foyer. If you feel led to partner financially with IJM, there's information in the foyer on both sides on the counters. There's information there you can take with you. There's envelopes if you want to make a contribution today. You can do that here today. Everything that's donated or contributed in the month of September is doubled because of their major push for getting awareness out this month. But you can partner financially that way, or you can go to the website ijm.org if God leads you to. But for us this morning, two ways. Be aware of what's going on around us, in our backyard, around us globally, and partner at least with us praying about this issue of injustice and slavery in the world. We need to stop ignoring the issue, and we need to pray personally and consistently and possibly even partner financially to fight against slavery in the world. Jesus has called us to be like him, to follow in his footsteps, to love people and show people compassion, to be people who use power and resources to set others free. Will you be a part of that? Let's pray. Father, I am in awe of the reality of slavery in this country and in this world. Father, it's hard to mentally and emotionally sometimes deal with the reality that so many people are living in a state of slavery, are being trafficked, are being beaten and abused on a daily basis. And while I live over here in a very comfortable life, not even thinking or being aware of what's taking place around this country. And so, Father, I believe that you desire for us to not only be aware, but to make an impact on people around the world. And so, Father, I pray that if you're leading us to do that, that we would take that step. Father, I pray conviction on all of us to make this a part of our regular prayer life. That we would be praying for people who are out on the front lines, who are doing the work, who are going in and bringing people out of slavery. I pray that we would make this a part of our prayer life. Father, thank you for people who are willing and excited to go over and to do that work. And Father, convict us, bring us to the place of doing what you call us to do. It's in your Son Jesus' name that I pray this. Amen.